Thank you, everybody, for joining our November webinar. As a part of using Zoom, which actually I think at this point everybody's quite familiar with, feel free to unmute yourself should you have any questions you want to participate. You can also use chat message to ask your questions if you don't want to jump into the conversation, but feel free to do so. I do ask people to please mute yourself when you're not speaking so we can have the line perfectly clear. Okay. But again, if it gets noisy, I'll mute everybody, but you still have the ability to unmute yourself. PMO Advisory is a PMI-RMP. And for our November topic, we thought we'd focus on sort of not a particularly popular topic, but I think an important topic for all of those who's looking to complete their PMI certification application. And in particular, we're going to focus on the PMP, PgMP, and PfMP. The other ones are relatively simpler and they're more like PMP. So in that sense, you cover almost all the applications. My name is Dr. T. Wu, and I am the CEO and founder of PMO Advisory. Here you can see a little bit of my background, my experience. The big takeaway is that I have essentially three sides to my job, to my professional career. On one hand, I am a hands-on practitioner. I still run a company. I still manage consulting projects. I develop training for my company, and often that's how you interact with me. I'm also a teacher. I teach at multiple places, Montclair State University, also at China Europe International Business School. And the third is I'm also an active volunteer in multiple places in the project management world. I'm for example, on the U.S. Technical Advisory Group that really is a mirror committee on the International Standard Organization for Project Program and Portfolio. I also being a member of volunteer on the global standard with PMI on portfolio management as well as on risk management. And currently, I just recently got a new role helping New York City chapter, which I live fairly close with, to be the director of symposium for 2021. So I'm fairly engaged in the project management community in various capacity. And what I'd like to bring my experience together is those three views, from a very practitioner-oriented view, from a more academic and research and training view, and then from a standard committee member. So today's topic is really on the application and what are some of the tricks and tools, the do's and don'ts about the PMI application. All our webinars are meant to be interactive. So again, feel free to jump in. Don't be afraid of disrupting me. If we run out of time or it's too disruptive, I may ask you to hold off. But generally, we have the opposite problem, not enough people engaging. So feel free to just jump in. Also use the chat to ask questions. So let's get started. First, I'd like to talk about the PMI World Certification. Actually, it's been growing recently. When I first put together this presentation, they only did have 8. Now I call it the traditional 8. Because if you go on PMI website, you realize they're coming up with a bunch of badges, which I'm not exactly sure how to count that. And then with the Agile, they have the entire discipline Agile set of certifications. So right now, it's really more than 8. But I still call the 8 traditional ones that's been around for the last 7 years almost, I think, as the traditional 8. So here you can see the number of active certification. This data is pretty recent. I just pulled that up not too long ago. The good news for those who's looking for certification is, of course, PMI is very well known for its PMP. And just to give you a sense of its growth, when I became PMP certified in 2003, many years ago, of course, there was about 7,500 of us. Not huge. My CEO at the time was so happy, I actually sent an email to the rest of the company, not a very big company, but congratulating me. I still remember that. It was rather touching. Today, of course, there's 1.some million, and these are active PMPs. So the growth of profession is like, if you draw a line, it's a really high slope. And I think today, if I got my PMP, I doubt anybody will send a note to the company congratulating a particular person. But that statement statement may still be true for PgMP and PfMP. As you can see, the PgMP is under 3,000 and PfMP is still under 900. And I became PfMP one of the early adopter group, I think around 2014, and there were 121 of us that got certified in May 2014. And I was one of the first 8 persons. My joke is, by the way, if I check now, I'd probably be one of the first 4 or 5th person because other people may not renew their certification. So at the rate I'm going, hopefully I live long enough, I may be number 1 at some point. PGMP, I became certified in 2010, and later I'll talk about, luckily they have simplified the process, which makes it easier to get the PGMP. So, and I also have RMP, that just did it more for the fun of it. So I speak with a degree of authority because I got audited multiple times. I have multiple certification, went through this process multiple times. Thanks, Susan. I will make it to number 1. Actually, I'm not sure. The number 1 person who finished PfMP is actually not much older than me. He's very active. So I'll have to be in my 80s, I think, before that happens. But putting numbers aside. So let's look at the certification process. For people who want the PMI certification, any of these 8, basically they follow the same 2 steps. Step A, get the application. And application is not always easy. So it's not simply filling out something, send it in, and you get automatic stamp of approval. If anything, in PGMP, PfMP world, it may actually be quite rigorous and difficult. The second piece is the examination. Generally speaking, you have 1 year after PMI give you the thumb up on your application to complete the examination, and you can have up to 3 tries. Now, remember, the reexamination fee can be quite expensive, so these are not freebies, but nonetheless, you have 3 tries. If you fail after the 3rd attempt and still didn't pass, you have to wait for a year and restart the application. So the penalty isn't huge because a year, frankly, goes by very quickly. Just think about 2020. It just went by like a blur. Let's look at the application process, which is something we will dive deeper into, of course. Generally speaking, there are actually 3 steps. Some cases, only 2 steps. Okay, so there is the completion review. And this is where PMI makes sure you have your experience. So for PMP, for example, assuming you have your bachelor degree, it's 3 years of experience, leadership experience, be clear, just not any experience. So if you're able to describe the completed PMI agree with you, then you pretty much could pass the completion review. Having said that, on PGMP and PfMP, the completion review may very well be the most difficult part of getting a pass. And part of the reason is because the people reviewing the application are what I call administrators. They're not necessarily program or portfolio experts. So what they have probably in front of them is a checklist. You know, does John or Jill have these experiences? And because they're really not experienced, if you use words to describe otherwise relevant experience, but in the words that they don't really understand, you don't get that check mark. So in some ways, I found that on the advanced applications for PfMP, PGMP, the completeness review is ironically the harder piece, because later